Hi, folks. I wanted to take a few minutes to go through some of the key things that you're going to be working on during this unit. Unit 5 of the course involves writing reports. And ultimately, you're going to develop a recommendation report. This is by far the most significant piece of writing that you do within this course. It will take the most time, it will take the most effort, it will take the most planning, and it will involve the use of research. Now, how to develop this kind of report is covered within Learning Unit 5. So you have to make sure you very carefully go through the required chapters and the required lessons. You'll see there's a specific lesson on recommendation reports. That's because the specific kind of report you're going to be developing is a recommendation report that has to follow this particular format. You'll see many of the other lessons deal with how to find quality college level research to incorporate in this type of writing, and how to cite it properly in APA format, which is required for this particular assignment. There's also a very important lesson on making sure that you don't engage in plagiarism. And plagiarism is not simply just people trying to cheat by copy and pasting from websites and passing it off as their own. That's the obvious form of plagiarism. But you could also find yourself in trouble with plagiarism if you don't properly credit sources when you've used them, even if you've put an entry on the references page at the end. An entry on the references page is not giving proper credit on its own. You'll see much more detail on that within the lessons 23, 24, and 25. And then lessons 26 and 27 cover the use of graphics and visuals and the specifics of APA format layout. Making sure you understand how to properly lay out a document when it's done in APA format. Now, like our previous unit, this one includes discussion topics that you have to participate in. But ultimately, the most important assignment is the recommendations report. So when we get down to the recommendations report itself, I'll pull up the directions here. You can see, I'm not going to read through the whole thing now, but you'll definitely take a close look at it. And you'll see that you have a number of different options that you can choose from in terms of your topic. So there are 8 different potential situations that are set up. These are kind of like scenarios or situations where you get to work on a recommendation on a real problem that exists somewhere in the actual world. Now, it might be taking a scenario and looking at the real world with that scenario. So number 1, find an actual company where a real problem exists in its business. Write a recommendation report proposing how to fix that specific problem. Now, this probably needs to be a problem that is substantial enough that it would require a whole recommendation report to be written. It can't be something as simple as let's just change this one particular way we do this one thing at a company. That probably wouldn't be substantive enough to write a full recommendation report about. It depends, I guess, on the process or the situation that you're looking at. But you'd want to deal with some kind of substantive problem where you think of that as something that it's got to be substantive enough that it'd be worth having the boss read a 4 or 5 page report about the issue in terms of ultimately leading to the recommendation that you're going to make. That's the first potential option. The second option, imagine you work for a group of real estate investors. Write a recommendation report on whether they should consider investing in a large amount of high-rise condos in downtown Fort Lauderdale Beach, Aventura, Miami Beach, downtown Miami, or some other area in South Florida. For this, I would say part of what you would want to do is focus on a specific area. So it could be it could be Plantation, it could be Davie, it could be Fort Lauderdale Beach. Focus on a particular area, because you want your research and your analysis to be specific to that area so that it's realistic. You want to make sure, of course, that you're using current real world information. So you would actually look for current real world information in terms of pricing and the housing market and all of the things that would be involved in this kind of investment process. Option 3. Imagine you work for the Broward County Commission. Write a recommendation report as to what actions the county can take to help improve affordable housing for residents within the county. So we know that there's obviously a housing crisis in terms of affordable rental and housing that can be purchased. What can government do about that? This would be thinking about it from that perspective. Number 4, imagine you work for a political committee in the Florida legislature. Write a recommendation report as to how the state should proceed with its efforts to restore the Everglades. So particularly if you're interested in environmental science, this would be a good one for you to consider. Number 5, imagine you work for a political candidate. Write a recommendation report on what, if any, actions should be taken to reform Social Security or Medicare to ensure their long-term viability. So if you're interested in Social Security or medical care issues, this might be an intriguing one to get into. Number 6, write a report about a new technology in your specific industry or field to determine its anticipated impact and make recommendations for how that industry should respond to this technology. So we want to be thinking about a technology that's new or that's emerging within your particular field. Look at how that technology is going to impact your industry and think about the specifics of how it might be best utilized within your industry. Number 7, find an actual company where worker productivity and or worker morale is low. Write a recommendation report on how that can be improved without negatively impacting the company's budget. Now, that does not mean that these improvements may not cost something. They still may cost the employer something, but you'd want to be able to argue that this will ultimately be beneficial in terms of the budget. In other words, the company will still make money and potentially make more money if they enact the improvements that you would be recommending. Number 8, imagine you work for the American Nursing Association. Write a recommendation report that proposes improving upon the shortfall of available nurses in the health industry. We know that in healthcare, there are not enough nurses. And some of it has to do with specialized nursing care that is short on supply. What can be done like across the industry to improve upon this shortfall? Now, number 9, you can create a variation on any of the above topics. All you have to do is submit to me a just short proposal, just a short paragraph explaining what you want to do as your topic that might be a variation on one of the above. So let's say, for example, you're interested in doing the thing where imagine you work for the Broward County Commission, but you don't want to look at housing affordability. You want to look at some other key local issue. That would be okay. That's a variation that would make sense. So same thing with number 5. Imagine you work for a political candidate, but you don't want to write about Social Security or Medicare. You want to write about some other kind of issue that you can make ultimate recommendations on. That's fine. Let's say, okay, here's a good one. Imagine you work for someone who's running for governor in the state of Florida, and you want to write a recommendation report on what can be done to help improve home insurance issues. There is a home insurance crisis in the state of Florida right now. Insurance rates have skyrocketed. So you could propose, like obviously you'd have to research about that particular topic in a lot of detail, and then you could propose things that candidate might advocate to help improve the situation. So that's how you could create variations within these individual topics. But you said if you want to do one of the variations, you just have to submit that to me ahead of time. Submit just a few sentences explaining what you want to do that's different than the actual original topic itself, just to get my approval and my feedback and suggestions on how to proceed. So those are the topics from which you may choose, but you can see there's some variations and some choice involved in the process. So you're going to be choosing one of those for your recommendation report. Now, as you'll see in the lesson on recommendation reports, they have to include a certain, format. And so these mean they have to include a cover page, an abstract, an introduction, a section called methods, a section called results, a section called conclusions, a section called recommendations, and then a references page in APA format. The details of all of that are covered within the readings that you'll be doing this week and specifically within our lesson on recommendation reports. Now, as part of this, you are going to have to incorporate research sources. You want to make sure you seek out quality research sources that are written by experts within their field. The best place to do that is, of course, in the academic databases, the library databases, particularly finding articles, because articles are shorter, they're readable, and they're more likely to be more current, because articles are published all the time. Books are not published as frequently. So finding articles on your topic, but particularly from the library academic databases, because that is where experts within their field publish. Experts generally do not publish on the general internet. They publish in journals and magazines that are typically only available through academic databases, not on the general internet. So at the end of this, I'll just briefly lead you through how to access those databases if you've never done that before. But within your recommendation report, you're going to have to make sure you incorporate at least 5 legitimate academic sources that are written by experts within their field. And they must be sources that are outside of any specific company. So let's say you're writing about a particular company in your recommendation report. You have to find research from outside the company. You can have some inside the company research too, but you need to have at least 5 legitimate sources that are outside of that company or organization. And you have to cite those properly in an APA format, both inside of the text of the report itself and on the references page, what we call in-text citations or parenthetical citations. You have to have properly placed within the writing itself. And again, we have a lesson on that within this unit showing you how to do that. If you don't cite your sources inside of the actual writing itself and all you have is a references page at the end, you're going to get a 0 on this assignment because that would be plagiarism. That would be not giving proper credit for where your information is coming from. You must cite your sources properly in APA format. That is part of the big challenge of this assignment, is learning how to make sure you're doing that properly. That is an absolute necessity. So please don't do a shortcut. Don't forget about that. That's absolutely necessary to be successful on this. The minimum length of this report is 1,250 words. So that's approximately 4 to 5 pages of writing. Everybody's going to be a little bit different in terms of how many pages that would be, but 4 to 5 pages is what you're aiming for. Look for a 1,250 word count. You'll see in terms of the layouts, you have to actually separate out some of the pages on their own specific page. Okay, so much more of the detail of what a recommendation report is going to look like is, of course, within this unit. So obviously, you need to go through all of that right now. You probably haven't done that yet. We're just starting the unit right now. But I wanted to give you an understanding of where this is all heading. Now, as you'll see in the syllabus, we have more time that we're working on this unit than we have with the previous units, because this is obviously a much more substantial project. This is by far the most significant project in the course, and it's by far the biggest chunk of your course grade. So it's something that you need to make sure you give the necessary time and effort over the next few weeks. If you have questions as you're working through this, or if you want to get feedback on your topic, if you want to get suggestions on how to proceed, feel free to email me. I'm happy to give you feedback and suggestions and help along the way. I really do want to help you. If you want me to look at like a draft of your recommendation report as you feel like you're getting close to completing it, I'm happy to look at it. Just send it to me via email and I'll give you some quick feedback. Okay. So that's the recommendation report itself. One of the things, of course, you're going to submit it in the assignment section of the course. As you already know, everything that's submitted in the assignment section of the course is automatically run through Turnitin, which would check to see if there are any issues with plagiarism. So that's part of why in this paper you are using research sources, but we have to make sure you credit them properly. And that's why there are lessons within this unit on making sure that you're able to do so. But if you have questions as you're going through, ask me. I'm happy to answer. Now, the one thing I wanted to show you before I end this video is I want to show you, if you don't already know how to access articles through the library databases, it's really simple. Any course that you take at Broward College, all you got to do is go inside the course website, click on resources, click on library resources, and then do a search. So I'm going to do real estate Miami. Let's say so you want to use a series of keywords that relate generally to your topic. So brainstorm a list of maybe 8 to 10 keywords and then mix and match in your search process. So I'm going to do that. Now, it'll initially get me to every possible thing that I could find related to these particular things. I've got 76,000 results here. This is not a Google search. These sources are not on the general internet. They're not on the internet if you go to Google. The overwhelming majority of these sources are articles that are written by experts within their field that are only available through these databases, these professional journals and magazines where experts in their field actually publish things. Experts in their field do not generally publish on the general internet. Experts in their field publish in journals and magazines that are related to their profession. And those tend to get published and digitally available only through these library databases, not generally on the general internet. So when you do this search, one thing you might want to do is limit the search just to articles. If you do it to everything, it could be like books too, but you may not have time to read a whole book for a paper that you're writing over the next few weeks. So you might want to just limit it to articles. Now, let's say, for example, I was thinking about writing about, about real estate investors looking at buying condos in Miami Beach. This first article looks like it'll be really helpful. It's relatively current. It's 2 years old, or almost 3 years old. So it's still relatively current in terms of the issue that's being discussed there. When I click on it, you'll see it gives me the information about the article itself. When I scroll down, there's an area called description. This is sometimes called an abstract or a summary. This is a 1-paragraph description of what the article is about. Now, this isn't the article itself, but it gives me some key information about the article. This is a quick way of me being able to know whether this is going to be a useful article for me to read. So always start by reading the description or the abstract to see if it's useful. If it looks useful, then say, okay, great, I'm going to read this article now and hopefully learn something useful from it. If you read the description and you don't understand it, then don't bother. This is not going to be a useful article for you if the description itself is not understandable. Now, to read the actual article itself, you see right here where it says full text availability. You click on the link there, that brings you to the specific database where that article is. And I'll let it pop up here so you can see how that works. Occasionally, you'll get to a screen right when you do there where it asks you to sign in from Broward College. Literally just click the sign in button and it'll automatically sign you in. Most of the time, it won't do that. Most of the time, it'll automatically sign you in because you've gone in through our course website. So it automatically logs you in through our course website. But some browsers every once in a while have a problem with that. So just if you get to that thing where it says sign in through Broward College, just click that button and it'll move you to the next step. And right here, I've got my article. So I can go through, read my article and see if it's useful. I can download it. I can print it. I strongly recommend downloading these files. Download them to your device because they're not just going to automatically, you'll have to search for them again. They're not going to just be automatically saved for you. So I strongly recommend that you just download the ones that you like that seem useful, download those to your device, save them there, and then you can keep searching and then go back and read all the good things that you found later on. Now, remember, for this assignment, you're going to need to find at least 5 quality research sources, and this is by far the best place to look. These library databases is where you find all of this kind of stuff that's written by experts within their field. So again, the process of doing that is pretty simple. All you do is click on resources, click on library resources, put in keywords. Let's say I want to do condo market, Fort Lauderdale, or I'll do Broward. Okay, because it's very local there, Broward, I'm getting much more limited set of results. I still got 814. I'm going to limit that to articles. Okay, but I'm getting very specific ones. Now, some of them may be way too old to use. This one's from 1998. That's going to be useless to me. Even 2010 is way too old to use for something to talk about the current real estate market. So I might not get anything good with that search. That's okay. That means I need to switch out my search terms. So maybe I do condo market in Florida and see what I find. Now, even on the sort by, you can sort by, let's say, date newest. So now I'm going to sort to see what's the most recent useful articles on this. I might find some more useful things that way. I'm definitely finding more recent things, 2022. Some of them may or may not be useful to my topic. This one's about condo safety in Florida and the current real estate market. That one seems like it actually might be a useful one. So again, once you find that article, you click on it, read the description, see if it's going to be useful to you if it has a description. They don't all have one. And then click on the database, and that'll get you right to the article itself, right where it says full text availability. And then you can save the PDF and come back to it later, read it further at that point. You'll also see that many of these, databases include the citation for you. What they mean is you can find the MLA or the APA citation. Like, it'll do it for you. This is what an APA citation for this particular article will look like. You can copy and paste that and put that on your references page. That's great. It's easy. Just make sure you're choosing the APA one, since that's what we have to use for this particular kind of assignment. If you've never used these library databases before, take some time to kind of play around in them. Just do search examples so you get used to how it works. This is where college level research is done. Google is for kids. I'm being blunt with you. College professors are under impressed by students that go to the general internet and find all of their sources on Google. It's not really serious adult level research on most topics. College level research uses library databases, and it doesn't really mean books. It means these articles that are only available through these databases. And there are hundreds of millions of these articles, because that is where experts in their field actually publish their work. So I strongly encourage you to use that for your research process. I think you'll find it quite helpful in finding real and useful, thoughtful information that helps you develop an intelligent analysis about the topic you've chosen. Okay? As you're working through the process the next couple of weeks, feel free to email me if you have any questions, or if you need just some guidance or suggestions as you're proceeding in your research process, or as you're proceeding in terms of thinking about how to analyze the topic that you've chosen. Okay, that's all for today. Take care, everybody.